The North Country Trail's first federal land acquisition, 80 acres of beautiful countryside we call Augusta Prairie. In partnership with the National Park Service, this gorgeous countryside property is now a permanent addition to the 119 miles of the NCT we proudly maintain and protect in the Chief Noonday chapter. It's volunteers like you, nature lovers, parents, children, and grandparents that are the backbone and lifeblood of the trail. Not only do the volunteers build, protect, and preserve these pathways through nature for others, but also create boardwalks and walkways to make the sights and sounds of the trail accessible to all. These trails are calling to you this year as part of our Hike the County Challenge. Step outside and enjoy time with friends and family or alone to just soak in this beautiful section of the NCT. Discover the pride our volunteers have in our hidden gem of a trail. Register for the challenge at hikethecounty@gmail.com. We hope to see you on the trail.
If you're driven by an adventurous heart, you're in luck. The 2021 Subaru Outback shares your spirit. With standard symmetrical all-wheel drive plus up to 33 miles per gallon, an available 260 horsepower turbocharged engine, advanced technology, and an available extra-large touchscreen. The best Outback ever. The 2021 Subaru Outback. Go where love takes you.
Please.
Hello, and thank you for visiting the 27th Annual Quiet Adventure Symposium. Today, I will be sharing my experiences on a section of the North Country Trail in the northern Lower Peninsula. My name is Jay Hanks, and I am the president of the Lansing Oran Paddle Club. I am also the 2012 recipient of the Verlin Kruger Award, and I have been paddling, hiking, and camping all of my adult life. I like being outside and exploring the rivers and forests around us. The North Country Trail, or NCT, is 4,700 miles in length, making it the longest hiking trail in the National Trail System. Stretching from Vermont to North Dakota, it covers a variety of ecosystems and terrain. In August of 2021, Rich Bailey and I undertook backpacking a segment of the NCT that passes through the northern Lower Peninsula in the Manistee National Forest. Approximately 1,150 miles of the NCT collectively traverses the upper and lower peninsulas of Michigan, which is more than any of the other states. We were modestly taking on a small section of approximately 40 miles of the NCT, plus an additional 10 miles in the Manistee National Forest that we have paddled and hiked through parts of for decades. The Manistee River on Michigan's northwestern side has provided years of canoeing, kayaking, and camping enjoyment. We have paddled it a lot and also hiked shorter sections. For us, this time would be a longer endeavor with no boats. We chose to start at the Little Manistee River at 9 Mile Bridge where the NCT crosses it, and I will tell you a little bit about the trail as we walk. Locally, Henry S. Udell, who was born in New York in 1824, moved to the area around 1852. The area we are hiking through is known as the Udell Hills, as he had two large farms in the area, the Little River Farm and the Big River Farm. That was what they called the Little Manistee River at that time, along with the main stream being the Big River. Native people had their own name for the Manistee, and it was originally called Manistigway, in Ojibwe meaning river with islands at its mouth. Today, the Udell Hills feature a recreation area called the Big M for the mountain biking and cross-country skiing it offers. The NCT passes to the west of the busiest part, if you could notice the number 29 on the left side of the map. Mr. Udell contributed to the logging work that occurred during this time, and the Udell Rollways was an area along the Manistee where logs were hauled to in the winter and then rolled down the bank into the river in the spring. Today, the Udell Hills offer beauty and habitat any season of the year with its hardwoods and high ground. We chose to camp after only a few hours on the trail as we had started in the afternoon. Dispersed camping rules apply, which are basically leave no trace ethics as they apply to the Manistee National Forest. We both were using lightweight solo tents, well suited for backpacking, and still giving us enough room for a good night's sleep. We camped within a kilometer of the Udell Lookout Tower, but since it would have been a bit of a bushwhack to reach it from our location, we were content to immerse ourselves in the backcountry. Even though the sun was still above the horizon because of the summer, it was time for us to prepare our dinner. Both of our packs were around 40 pounds to start, so even though we were going light, the first dinner was a little more indulgent in weight. That meant real cheese with the dried and refried beans and rice. An alcohol stove and titanium cookware also kept the weight down. There was no need for a campfire, as it was plenty warm already, and there was more than adequate light until we turned in for the night. Later, we hung our food and hygiene articles in waterproof bags off the ground. The traditional bear cache is also effective on keeping smaller food predators away. The next morning, we were back on the trail through the hardwoods on the ridge. Moss had grown up along the worn trail edge, making an interesting demarcation. The growing sunlight exposed the changing forest as we began to make our way off the ridge. Birches began to mix with the oak and maple, and ferns started to cover the forest floor. We finally reached the base of the Udell Hills, with small clearings and underbrush beginning to be more common. We stopped to rest and refill our water at the Udell trailhead on M55. We had not encountered anyone else on the trail so far, but an apparently abandoned tent we had passed that morning had us scratching our heads with no vehicles in the parking lot. Chalking that up to another mystery on the trail, we crossed M55 and continued our way down into the Manistee River Valley. We eventually had to cross Pine Creek, and the trail took us onto the road to use the bridge. We had considered trying to make it this far for the previous night's camp for the water access, but we were glad we didn't, as there really was no practical location to camp there. Shortly after we resumed our trek, however, we were surprised to find a campsite welcoming NCT hikers. It wasn't marked on the current maps, but the signs posted indicated that folks passing through were welcome to use it. We added that to our list of surprises on the trail. One thing that was not a surprise was our inevitable bit of road hiking. This is an occasional feature on the NCT as it makes its way through the country. One benefit of road hiking can be not having any uphill sections or rough terrain. Still, it can be hot and dusty with no real way to make it any shorter than to keep going. Yes, there is more than one Michigan Avenue in Michigan, and the cross street is Chicago Avenue. This one wasn't very busy. We finally reached a spot where the trail followed the road but through the woods. We appreciated the shade and the softer soil. Part of the MCT crosses tribal land in this area, which we treated with the same respect we did for all of the trail. This area clearly showed the signs of reforestation from previous logging. It was an opportunity to look up and around to appreciate the great weather we had enjoyed so far. Back on National Forest property, we pondered the significance of the signage on a simple corner. It made it look more like a gate. Finally, hiking past Blacksmith Bayou and down by the banks of the Manistee River, we had more open sky to appreciate. We were looking forward to refilling our water bottles and eating lunch. Reaching and crossing High Bridge exposed us to vehicle traffic again. Although not overly busy, the passing vehicles had grown unusually loud. We have paddled this section many times, and this is the first time that I had crossed this bridge on foot. The kilometer-long trek uphill from there on High Bridge Road was an exercise in endurance. Hiking on the shoulder of the road in the afternoon sun with a continual climb had very few redeeming moments as the traffic whizzed by. This is the price you pay going from point A to point B. You get the bad with the good along the way. Cherry-picking your routes on a day hike will leave this climb off the list, but it's the only way to the top. We eventually turned off the top onto a dirt 2-track that was signed for getting back into the woods. Looking back, it doesn't seem like the sign is in the right place. It should be on the highway with the RVs barreling downhill to the river crossing. About a mile down the trail along the ridge above the river, we came to an overlook that marked where the original High Bridge had stood. In contrast to the modern one, the former bridge was really high. The railroad trestle was built in 1889 to haul lumber from the area to market. We spent a few moments contemplating the history at this location. Lumbermen, working with the implements of the day, felled the seemingly unending forests in the area. Rollways, like the Udell Rollway, were used by dragging the cut timber during the winter to high banks to be rolled downhill into the river at spring floods. Log drives then occurred down to the river mouth at Lake Michigan, where the marked logs were sorted by ownership and milled for shipments to market. It was a hard life, and once the timber ran out, the lumbermen moved on. And so we finally moved on. The trail wound along the ridge, and we took advantage of the breeze the higher ground offered. We couldn't see much of the river from where we hiked, but you could see the sky through the trees and you knew you were on the ridge. We had a full water load from lunch in our packs, and the climb up the hill made us feel every step. We had hoped to find a nice overlook to pitch our tents, but we finally settled for a secluded spot off the trail that still caught a little breeze. My own tent was set up on the flattest spot I could find, and it was time to take a break. We had the rest of the day to just rest and eventually get around to preparing our dinner. We had hiked about 14.5 miles since we had started the previous day, with almost 11 of it being today. However, it seemed like we had been on the trail longer than that. Packing and unpacking was starting to get into a routine, and in a matter of seconds it seemed like, we fell asleep as soon as we were lying down. We were on our way early the next morning and continued upriver along the ridge. The morning sun began to break through the tops of the trees high above the river below. A short set of steps, somewhat of a rarity on the trail, took us up onto an esker that topped the ridge. It was built to slow down the erosion from hikers getting up to the slope right here. Eskers are narrow ridges left by the glaciers, and hiking along this one's narrow path was just a little more careful. The slip here might make for a grumpy climb back up onto the trail, so we paid attention to what we were doing, but not so much that we couldn't take pictures. As the esker gradually widened out, the warm sunny morning and the distant calls of birds made for a contemplative mood as we passed through the forest. Conversation lapsed without any conscious effort until we began to take several switchbacks down off the high ground. The trail took us down through a bayou called Sawdust Hole. A nearby mill back in the late 1800s left piles of sawdust, giving the area the name. Today, it is an open area with feeder creeks and marshes to meander through. This was a planned location to collect our drinking water, as we had been dry camping the previous 2 nights. That means we were not camping near an immediate water source and only had the water we brought for that night. It just worked out that way for our time and distance. It was also an opportunity to rest in the sunshine and take in a view of an open spot in the river. I remember paddling through this section many times over the years, and I never knew back then that there was a trail up on the bank here. Perception changes with your point of view. A sign describing the area stands faded as we moved on. The sawmills here were for lumber, not destined to be shipped out to Lake Michigan in an uncut condition. We looked back from the top of the hill we had just climbed. There is a campground nearby that is popular with the fishermen, but we would pass by unnoticed. We reached Dillings Road, which runs down to Tippy Dam, also popular with the fishermen for its access and camping. Built in 1918 as a hydroelectric project, it is also home to some 25,000 bats living in the spillway openings. Again, we would pass by unnoticed. Back on the trail, we made our way up onto the high ground on the north side of the reservoir known as Tippy Pond. There was a variety of terrain, and we seemed to be led up small valleys or draws between the higher hills, only to drop back down again into a smaller one. I thought that these draws and valleys would be a really lousy place to be during a rainstorm. We finally came out of the woods at Coates Highway north of Red Bridge, thus completing our woodland trek for that day. However, the mile on the road down the hill to our planned camp for the night seemed to take forever in the hot afternoon. We probably made our most civilized camp during the trip at a small loss in comfort. We much preferred the forest floor to packed bare dirt. As we watched the river flow by under the rising moon, we discussed our plans for the final stage of our trip. Almost 26 miles has been walked in 3 days, with nothing but sunshine and warm temperatures. Why were we still carrying tarps and rain gear? Day 4. There is something different today as I set out with my friend and his daughter who joined us this morning. We are taking the connector from Red Bridge back up to the NCT, but not using the road this time. We only used the road before because it was shorter. Now we can move through the woods wondering why there are so many mosquitoes bothering us with 25,000 bats in the area. All the plans I had made prior to the trip are a fading memory. My mind is changing over to something I call bush time. That is, I am present in a moment that feels like it goes on forever. It starts to feel like this is all I have ever been doing and will continue to be doing. The climb back up to the ridge to the main trail distracts me with the physical effort, but in the same way it draws me into living just one step at a time. We rest briefly at the junction, and I reflect on us having made the decision to leave tarps and rain gear back at the car. It was an opportunity to change what we started with, and a small gamble on our part. I have always been in the wilderness with the proper gear so that I could stay dry and comfortable no matter what the weather. I never wanted to be that guy who went out there unprepared. But 3 days of constant sunshine and a forecast calling for more of the same has given me the confidence to go even lighter. The NCT on the northwest side of the Manistee River between Red Bridge and the Marilla Trailhead continues to follow the high ground as it has since we climbed the hill at High Bridge Road. Once we get up on the ridge, we can go decent distances before having to drop down into a few draws along the way. The switchbacks provide interesting perspective changes. We occasionally stop for a drink of water and a snack. We are making good time, but there is no sense of hurry. For the first time since we started, we begin to run into another hiker going the other way, as this is one of the more popular sections. It isn't enough to make us feel like anything is very crowded, but you can tell by the trail that it is well used. By the time we reach our destination for the night at Eddington Creek, I am feeling it in my feet though. Wading barefoot in the creek downstream from where we would collect water is almost numbingly cold, but it takes the heat out almost instantly. It is surprisingly refreshing considering I am still wearing the same clothes I started with. A few other hikers come by and look at our camp with envy, and we invite them to make space with us as there is plenty of room. We only use what we need. We settle into our routines of preparing another dinner, but there is no hurry. This is what we came for, to spend time in the wilderness simply living. 2 more hikers make a small fire upstream from us, but it really isn't necessary. Even though the proximity to the stream has cooled the air by several degrees, there is no need to be any warmer. Day 5. Quietly rolling out of camp after breakfast, we head up the trail with the dew still on the foliage along the edges of the trail. Our footsteps are quiet without making any extra effort to do so. We reach the trail intersection where a connector goes on up to Marilla. We continue on the NCT before our own connector to the Manistee River Trail. This will take us back down to the river and the footbridge across it. The forest through here is mixed hardwoods with some underbrush and makes for easy travel. Reaching the edge of the cliff to look down at the river is beautiful, and a single photo doesn't really capture what it feels like to view it from here. "5 days and some 36 miles of walking changed the perception of beauty." It is a mystery to me how the trail from here to the footbridge can be so simple and yet so confusing. I've never really gotten lost, but I seem to continue to take a different route every time, as there are many side trails and loops. It is only a problem if the shortest path is your goal. I wouldn't even be out here at all if I was only interested in the shortest path. Crossing the Mini-Mac, as it is called, is a turning point, literally. We will be able to loop back from here to Redbridge, following the southeast side of the river, but the big picture has changed. The southeast trail, the Manistee River Trail, is well signed with maps at every intersection and side access from a road that parallels the river. It is easy to think about this being the river valley, but it is not in the grander sense. A topographic map is a little confusing, as every road and path is shown, and that is distracting, as it only focuses on the river corridor as we see it today. A satellite rendering shows the larger glacial valley from some 10,000 years ago after the glaciers retreated, bordered by M37 to the east and the high ridges we had just hiked on the west. Between these two prominences flowed an ancient river, spreading out in a floodplain that made the small scratch in the earth left behind the river we see today. The Udall Hills in the lower left would have just been an island back in that day. Although the high banks on the left side of the river give you better views of the water than the ridges even higher on the right, they are just the high banks, and not the true edge of the ancient river valley. The Manistee River Trail back to Redbridge makes for a great overnight backpacking loop for a weekend, and lots of folks day hike it. The scenery is great, and most can manage the 10-mile one-way trip from Redbridge up to Seton Creek Campground and Trailhead. Others make out and back trips if they are trying to keep the distance down, but no matter what people do, they're going to get great views. The high banks on this side have parts that drop down to the river level and footbridges, as there are more streams that come in on this side. For myself, it is a journey with the beginning starting to be a more distant memory. It seems like every turn of the trail offers something new, and at the very least it offers something beautiful. I am somewhat oblivious to my dirty, sweaty clothes, and it is with a little smile inside when we encounter bright, shiny people day hiking in the opposite direction. It isn't until we encounter another backpacker who had been on the trail as long as we had that we felt an undefined kinship. Our conversation made the mysteries we had found on the trail even more curious. Yes, there are mysteries on the trail as well as surprises. Everyone has their own definition of what you find and what you leave. It was a small epiphany for me to consider one of the Leave No Trace principles of Leave What You Find to also apply to personal discoveries. They say what happens on the trail stays on the trail, and there are mysteries and surprises that are still there for the next person. We camped for the last night at Arcola Creek, and it was interesting to see other hikers settling into their various camps. Folks just kind of settle into their own little niches in the wilderness, and even though there was over a dozen people camped around the stream crossing, it was a quiet and private night. Walking out on day 6 was an interesting feeling. I was practically out of food, that is, not enough to continue if I had wanted to, but I had a strong desire to keep going. I felt that if I was resupplied with food, like many thru hikers do, the journey could continue. "6 days and almost 50 miles is just getting warmed up," I thought, but I was satisfied with the time I did spend. The ends of my trips are always bittersweet. There is a joy in completion mixed with a sadness of being over that is a very desirable feeling to look back on. You can't delay it or prolong it. You can only experience it for yourself. So, if you are looking for your own adventures, mysteries, surprises, and satisfactions on the trail, this is it. Thanks for watching and joining us at the 27th Annual Quiet Adventure Symposium. I hope you are already thinking about planning your next adventure.